Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Lucy. Join us for another Relationship Anarchy research conversation. Together we talk about the anarchy of motherhood, connecting with our old-fashioned roots, and relationship anarchy as a listening practice. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Dr. Nicole. I'm a sex and relationship psychotherapist providing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And I'm also the founder of the Pleasure Practice, supporting individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, oh my gosh, wow. Did you hear that, Dr. Nicole? Dear listener, it's official. Yeah, I got my doctorate. It's all official. I am Dr. Nicole, and it feels wild to say that. Oh gosh, to all of my listeners out there who have been here since day one, the original episodes of the show with conscious objectors and the whole thing. I mean, hi, I have so much love that you have been tuning in with me for the last 4.5 years to be in this space. And if you're newer to this journey, hey, hello. I'm so happy that you've joined us here because we're having some powerful, badass conversations in this space. And I'm really excited to use this next chapter to embody that liberation with a full voice and confidence. And it is such a joy to be releasing these Relationship Anarchy episodes with you, dear listener. It is the continuation of my doctoral research. My dissertation on relationship anarchy is available for free on my website because we need more free resources on this topic. So 200 pages of relationship anarchy content is waiting for you. And dear listener, if you are ready to come onto the show and have a conversation with me about your relationship practice, the link is in the show notes below to come on, answer the questions, and be a part of the conversation because, as I will remind all of us, relationship anarchy is not defined by the experts or the doctors. It is defined by the collective community. And so every single one of us has a voice to be heard in this movement, and it is truly an honor to be holding space for you and to share all of these radical conversations each Wednesday. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my resources and offerings at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people. So thank you. If you want to join the Patreon community, get exclusive access into my research and personal exploration, you can head on over to patreon.com/modernanarchypodcast, linked in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, please know that I'm sending you all my love, and let's tune in to today's episode. Dear listener, there's a space already waiting for you where you are invited to let go of every old script about sex and relationships and begin living a life rooted in your pleasure, empowerment, and deep alignment. I'm Dr. Nicole, and this is your invitation to the Pleasure Liberation Groups, a transformative, educational, and deeply immersive experience designed for visionary individuals like you. Together, we'll gather in community to explore desire, expand relational wisdom, and embody the lives we're here to lead. Each session is woven with practices, teachings, and the kind of connection that makes real transformation possible. And I'll be right there with you, guiding the process with an embodied curriculum that supports both personal and collective liberation. This is your invitation into the next chapter of your erotic evolution. Say yes to your pleasure and visit modernanarchypodcast.com/pleasure practice to apply. And so the first question I like to ask each guest is, how would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Well, I am a mom.
Yeah.
That matters to me a lot. I am a community builder within the sport of Highline. I am consumed by the business of trying to human well. And I garden mostly for money, but not exclusively.
Sure.
I write. I'm not published, but maybe I would be one day. I've not tried. And I work to make the business of my life as joyful an experience for myself and anyone else I encounter as I can. And that's like the core piece of work that I see myself doing.
Beautiful. I already see that tie into relationship anarchy, so I'm sure we'll get into it as we go. So welcome. It's a joy to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So the big first question, what is relationship anarchy? What does it mean to you? How do you define it?
It's a philosophy that I found myself aligning with before I even had a name for it.
Sure, yep.
So I don't really call myself anything in terms of gender, sexuality, relationship style. I find all those things, when you use them as a label, become a little bit too tight. But I definitely would say that relationship anarchy is like most closely allied name for a philosophy that describes how I like to manage my connections. I think I maybe I found the term sometime around 2017 maybe, but even before that it was something I was thinking about as a queer person, as a person that leans towards non-monogamous structures, and exploring that as a lifelong thing from probably the age of about 14 onwards. It's definitely something that when I arrived at that term and the literature, Andy Nordgren's manifesto, right. You had Juan Carlos interviewed recently on the podcast, his book, his writing, these things so suddenly like clicked. And I felt like, okay, there are other people who ally with this description, who ally with this philosophy. And it felt like a homely kind of place. So I've been working into those ideas and what they mean to me for quite a long time. Yeah. Most of my life, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so many of my research participants have spoken about feeling connected to this concept, this idea, even before they had language for it, right? So I think you're tapping into that, these wanting to expand outside of many of the boxes that our society gives us, that is so deep in our subconscious of how to relate, how to be, how to see ourselves in community, right? And so I feel like you're tapping into something that I saw across many participants of feeling this calling, this drive, this way of relating way before there was even words for it. And then once finding those words, beginning the journey of what do these words mean to me? And I'm sure it has developed over the years, right? You say those two words, relationship, anarchy, but what that looks like in practice, I'm sure has changed.
Hugely, and deepened an awful lot. I think initially there was a conflict, I guess, in the sense that I was reading into it, finding myself very allied with the ideas. And then there was also this piece where I knew that the word anarchy was widely misunderstood. And I'd encountered that quite a lot. And I sort of understood that the common parlance definition involved chaos and things blowing up and this really dramatic thing. And yet my personal lived experience of what that meant, what people who practice a rejection of hierarchy were actually like, was so different, was like miles apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was reluctant to use the term for myself.
Sure.
Or to say, I ally myself with relationship anarchy as a philosophy, because I felt like I would be so readily misunderstood if I was to use that term.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that's happened for me is that I've found there aren't any terms that really fit. And what I need is a conversation. And so I will say a few kind of keywords if anyone invites that conversation. But what I really am after is more depth than that. So it's like a useful thing for people to understand that word more. But I think the conversation about what it really feels like to be you and what it feels like to be them is always the more important piece than the label.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's why I enjoy the podcast space so much, right? I personally haven't got into like short form content, which is there's obviously a need for that and to create information and all of that. For me, I'm like, oh yeah, give me an hour and a half conversation where we get into this and the nitty gritty and what it looks like, because it's way too 30 seconds, of a clip is not enough to get into it. And so I love that we have all the space to get into that and to grow and learn together in these longer conversations. And so I'm curious if you were to try and speak to your younger self that didn't want to align with that label because it meant chaos and destruction, what sort of wisdom would you have for your younger self that you would say now about the words anarchy and what that looks like?
I think something that's been another theme that's run through my life is building my capacity to self-advocate. And obviously within the relationship anarchy philosophy, that kind of autonomy and that kind of boundariness are really important. And I've always been strong on vulnerability. I've always been strong on connection, and something that I wasn't terribly strong on was boundaries and self-advocacy.
Sure.
So I think actually there's just been a process where that's bolstered those skills for me. And then the people I've been relating to, because they've been on a similar wavelength, have also been in that feedback loop of bolstering those skills in myself and in them. And it's meant that I feel like it's okay for me to sometimes say things that sound, unacceptable to someone else or difficult or challenging, because I trust myself to bring an approach whereby they can talk to me more, that I'm open to questions and I'm open to being able to substantiate why I feel and think the way that I do.
Yeah.
There's so many choices I've made in my life that have, without being about that, set me apart from the norm. And so all along there's been like a flow towards but going, well, okay, maybe I'm doing this differently, but I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think for my younger self, I would say you have the strength to help people understand you. Yeah. That's a thing I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many skills to be learned in that practice, right? I feel like part of the world of hierarchy means we sort of defer to a specific relationship. And maybe even in some polyamorous context to relationships, right? Or whatever sort of frame you're looking at, but you defer to these relationships that are more important than the others. And part of that means that there's these assumptions, these ways of relating where you might negate yourself or like feel like you have to show up in certain ways to follow certain scripts, like the relationship escalator, right? All these other things. And so when you take off all of those structures, you remove the paint by numbers to have that blank canvas. Oh my goodness. The amount of need to find the language and the skills to advocate for what you want and also to care for other people in that, because Lord knows there's going to be so many mismatched desires, not just sexually, but also romantically, platonically, time, energy, commitments, because you're navigating it with so many different people, so many different feelings, so many different emotions that, Wow. Our society doesn't really give us the space or the time to build these skills. Most of us are in jobs that require us to work in ways that like we don't get to learn these skills, right? And so stepping into a world where you're navigating multiple different types of connections and relationships with intentionality, that is such a muscle
Mhm.
that every day I am humbled by. Every day I go deeper
Mm.
down to this journey. I'm like, wow, new lesson here, new lesson there, messed up over there, got it. You know what I mean? So just
Yeah.
wow. And that's we're kind of leading into that next question, which is how do you practice it? What does relationship anarchy look like for you in your practice?
Mhm. One of the key themes that's come up over and over again is that it's a responsive practice, it's a listening practice. So, right from the get go of forming a relationship, and I don't really use that term to mean a partnered romantic sexual relationship. I mean, any connection that I make. One thing that's important to me that I've adopted, because it's just a place I feel comfortable, is to take one version of myself everywhere.
Mm.
So it could be a relationship at work. It could be my relationship with my daughter, my relationship with a sexual or romantic partner, my relationship with what other people would define as a friend. To have those connections be defined by listening to and responding to where it is that intimacies naturally emerge. So it might be that there are certain activities I enjoy doing with someone. It might be there are certain types of conversation I enjoy with them. It might be that I have the hots for them, but I don't particularly want to be sexual with them, or they don't want to be sexual with me. There's so many different intimacies that we can share with a person.
Right.
And I like to take the time and the thoughtfulness to really just pay attention to where those emerge naturally.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something that we don't commonly take time in this society to do. In Western culture, with a kind of relationship escalator model, there's an idea that if someone's interested in you, you check in, you're like, yeah, I think I'm kind of pretty much interested in you too. Oh, we'll hop on together and see if we can make a
Right.
relationship out of this. And then somewhere down the line, you might find that there are some things that are less compatible and stuff starts to break down. Whereas I like to really give the time to nurture the space between us and see what's flourishing there naturally without trying to force it into any particular mold. And I have a whole range of different relationships that I value. I like the term significant others because it just allows me to say there's a whole range of people who are really significant to me.
Mm-hmm.
I have two partners that I have a sexual or kink relationship with. So in the sense of like looking at whether there's a non-monogamy component to my
Sure.
practice, there definitely is, but that
Yeah.
fluctuates.
Totally.
And whether or not I'm sexual with someone is definitely not the cornerstone of their significance to me. I relate to a lot of people in terms of like the domesticity of daily life and community around the Highland community that I'm in. We're sort of quite nomadic.
Mm.
So, as an extreme sports community, we move around the country to wherever it is it's possible for us to carry out our sport.
Sure.
And then we'll pop up in little van villages or we'll be
Ah.
camping together. And the kind of the cooking, the talking, the emotional support, the lending of things that people might need in any given moment, that's really fluid. And it's
Mm-hmm.
lovely to have that community support that's really kind of domestic household stuff, but
Yeah.
shared kind of nationwide at times between a whole bunch of different people from different backgrounds, different ages. And I would say that my relationship anarchy practice definitely comes into that. I share my home with loads of people. There's quite a few people in the community that I bed share with because we have a small space and we're
Sure.
just sharing the resources that we have.
Yeah.
But it's very much related to who's got capacity to do what and who
Mm-hmm.
needs what. And
Mm-hmm.
that's like I find that my sports community is a lovely place where that really flourishes, that practice of thinking that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say that another big place that shows up is in my parenting with my daughter.
Yeah.
For the longest time since she was small, because I come from a background in science of looking at, well, I studied behavioral ecology. So
Okay, cool.
my kind of research background was how behavior is adaptive to a creature, how the behavior helps the creature adapt to its environment. And I took very much from the primate parenting model.
Sure.
So I did the things that are more common nowadays of sling carrying and co-sleeping and breastfeeding. And I treated my daughter a bit like she was a little primate.
Sure.
He is one. Um, and then that also extended to this concept of alloparenting, which
Yep.
she's grown up with, which is to dissolve the sort of strict nuclear family two parent model and say all these other adults that are in her life are terribly important. Some of them she's had relationships with that are lifelong. Sometimes she might see someone only once or twice a year, but they're someone she's desperately fond of. And all of them caretake, all of them are helping. Sometimes because I have health challenges, they're the people who get her pajamas ready, or
Mm.
somebody will contribute a bedtime story, or people will contribute cooking, or, you know, more formal forms of childcare. But that's definitely a place where the breakdown of hierarchy and then a kind of adoption of this non-standard allo-parenting model, which is more common in so many cultures, but less so in a kind of Western European setting. So yeah, I wasn't close to my family of origin geographically or emotionally particularly. And then also
Mhm.
these friends in my sports community have just become such an important part of our life.
Yeah.
We really have that like queer chosen family
Mm.
experience on steroids, and it's
Yeah.
wonderful. I can't thank all of the people involved in my daughter's life enough for what they bring to
Right.
her.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, historically, that's what we have done, right?
Mm,
As a
mhm,
culture, when you look back to the history, it wasn't just a nuclear family. That's much more of a
mm,
modern concept that is not embraced around the world, right? And so you're tapping into wisdom that has existed for centuries, right? Of raising in community and not putting all of that burden onto one or two people. So I definitely, as a clinician, have lots of thoughts about things like postpartum depression, right? And what that could be a part of and a reflection of under these systems and things like that. Um,
yeah. And
yeah,
how
we,
isolating it can be to be in motherhood
yes.
in the systems and cultures that we have right now. And there was 5 months when after I first had her where I was very low. And then there was time where I kind of went back to the wild a bit, and she and I would wild camp for days on end. And
Yeah.
then eventually we became, through some very challenging circumstances where we were homeless at the beginning of the pandemic,
Mm,
we became part of this community that
yeah.
raised us up. You
Yeah.
know, they literally provided clean socks at times
Mm,
and so much support. And I
mhm.
think that that's a place where this philosophy of relationship anarchy, where the cherishing of a non-sexual, otherwise termed friendship sort of relationship or connection with somebody becomes absolutely precious.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think is it's a very conscious decision between me and my daughter. She talks about her allo parents. She makes reference. She even jokes. She
Yeah.
gives them points. They
Oh,
get points for when they do really cool parenting things or really useful parenting things.
I love
Sometimes they
that.
get more points than me, and they're disappointed about that.
That's funny. That's so funny. I love it. I love it. Yeah, that's so beautiful. And again, we all need that. We all need more support, right? It's interesting how under capitalism, the more privilege you have there, the more you can outsource and buy that support, quite literally as babysitting or a preschool, right? Of where you're still getting support from a community, but now you're just paying for it.
Yeah,
Right. And so a lot of us have that ability, and that's kind of how we're still functioning for that need for community. But it's there's a brokenness to that when there's not that reciprocity that you're speaking of community spaces where there's that give and flow back. And yeah, I think about when I had done my dissertation, people had asked me, like, what was the most interesting thing you learned about relationship anarchy that you didn't see coming? And one of my research participants had talked about using relationship anarchy in her relationship with her children. And for me,
mm,
I had come so much from the polyamory, non-hierarchy lens, and I think I
yeah,
was just seeing it through this lens of sexual liberation and freedom in that space. And so to have my participants speak about child rearing, I was like, what? you know, like trying to understand what this looks
Yeah.
like in relationships that aren't just the sexual liberations piece or the relational piece, which, you know, there's a lot of movement with the asexual community as well that speaks to that too.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was so eye-opening to see that we all have multiple relationships. I feel like if I can do anything in my career, it will be to dismantle rape culture and invite all of us to reflect that we all have multiple relationships
Yeah.
and we all need multiple relationships. And so I'm hearing how the community for you has been a space of mutual aid,
Very much.
care. Yeah. And also, we are social creatures, and so we need that. And so I'm sure even just your mental health, your well-being, it's reflected from all these different relationships. And also to be a mother is there's a whole cultural narrative about what that means to do that and to do it well, right? And so I'm curious even for you that piece, because I know that at least in our Western society, there's a lot of negativity around women and liberation outside of anything that's the strict norm model,
Yeah.
despite the fact
I
that we
think
know. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
there's even tighter restraints then on there in terms of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Yeah. I used to get a lot of comments about the bag I would bring out with me when my daughter was small.
Mm,
So people would question the sling carrying, although it's not that unusual now, but this is
sure.
like 11 years ago. And they would say, huh, isn't that going to make your back bad? Or won't that make her needy? Or don't you want to break from her all the time? And yeah, sometimes I really wanted a break. You know, and
Yeah,
when she'd thrown up in my bra for the third time that day, I really wanted a break.
sure.
But I also got so much satisfaction from having her close, and she was that much calmer as quite a high need baby anyway, that it actually afforded me more of a break most of the time. But the bag I would bring out with me was a tiny army surplus satchel, and it contained a few bits and pieces that I needed for her. But I didn't have formula because I was breastfeeding. I know not everyone has that option, and I
Sure.
was really lucky to be able to nurture the breastfeeding relationship with her that I have. So I'm only speaking to the way I solve these problems, because I think a really important piece of motherhood is that people should be allowed to choose whatever it is that works for them, because it's a huge development of your self-awareness, and
Sure.
that needs holding carefully, and it needs nourishing.
Mm-hmm.
People mostly just saw me with no stuff, and could
Mm,
conceive of how I would be able to cope leaving the house for like 4 or 5 hours without this stuff, because we have an idea that children need lots and lots of stuff.
mm,
I did nappy free pretty much rearing with her, so she learned to go to the loo immediately. She was in the sling, she would wriggle, I would help her. And it was a reciprocal relationship. But I come from a background of observing behavior, so I find that
sure.
quite easy. Other people might find that a really difficult thing, but it meant that I was out in the world a bit more, and really keenly aware of how much the confines of what's expected of motherhood, the bedtime routines, the formula feeding, the places it's considered safe or not safe to take a child, the ways in which it's considered unsafe to carry them even. I used to carry her on my shoulders as soon as I could, and she would
Sure.
balance that perfectly fine. But people would stop me in the street and criticize me and say that what I was doing was dangerous, even though she and I were in our routine, you know, and we were just shopping in the local supermarket, and there was nothing to it. I think all these things, because they've set me apart, even though they were just me naturally responding to the situation I found myself in, it's made me have to philosophize a little bit more, and made me have to think through why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing.
Mm,
And so I think that's where I suddenly found this concept of relationship anarchy colliding with the mothering that I was doing,
mm-hmm.
because yet again I was being called upon to change the shape of the way I was connecting to my child, and also everyone else involved in my child's life, because I didn't fit the mold that was handed to me.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yes. And so seeing the ways that relationship anarchy is that examination of the power structures and how that impacts our relationships, all of our relationships, often on a unconscious level, because we are social creatures, and so we need to be accepted by the people around us to survive and to thrive. And so if people are having all these judgments towards you, right, it's really difficult to unpack how deep that goes into our desires to be met and safe within community, right? So it's like this unconscious process that we have to examine. Wow, okay, all of these things, the relationship escalator, the ways even of parenting, of what that means and how to do that, right? Like that is all deep within our unconscious, because it's the water that we swim in, right? And this water that we're swimming in is not very great, right? It's that quote, it's no sign of health to be well adjusted to a sick society, right? And so some of these pieces, like feeding, all these other things, like it helps us to survive under this society. But if we take a step back, like, what is this society actually helpful, right? So like taking that next level back. And so I'm sure that's only just one area of probably many that you were pushing back on societal expectations, which can be really challenging. I would imagine too also that the community that you're in probably has similar values, and I find that often that can help to balance all of the criticism from people who might have judgments and a lack of understanding, who think anarchy is chaos, right? If you have your own inner circle of people that do understand you and do get it, that can kind of form the resilience to be able to stand in your truth and your values and your intuition with these things.
The word resilience really resonates for me there, because I think the community has been my source of resilience. There's been times in the journey that me and my daughter have had that's been really difficult, and having that support, having that love, having people who will listen, who you can air these things with, even in terms of the motherhood aspect, because of living the way that I do and being so much a part of this community, I've actually been able to take on a sport that as a single mum that would be really hard. I know other people who've had really challenging experiences where they were into the sport of highlining, but then motherhood has made it really difficult for them to access that. And it's happened in ways that you wouldn't expect. It's often a lot of men who are 30, 25 or younger even, who are the ones really facilitating my involvement in the sport as a 42-year-old mom.
Sure.
And I think that's like something that people wouldn't expect. But then because they're around me and my daughter, there are things they get back from that relationship too. And there's moments that I'll never forget where I had two guys in the back of my bus having a really big dialogue about breastfeeding ethics. And they're in their early 20s. And these are things that kind of come up because we're mixing and matching all of the societal expectations and breaking them in different ways. And the fact that there's a child in the community and a mother in the community brings up conversation. It kind of like, it's a point of interest for people. And I think that's a really lovely thing that wouldn't happen in a sport that otherwise maybe people would think was associated with, young, fit guys. Sure. And nobody from an older generation, or perhaps less so female athletes. And like there's loads of ways in which Highline kind of cuts across that. And there are people of all different ages and people of all different backgrounds and orientations kind of coming together. But then the dialogues that come out of that are wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So many opening of conversations, much needed conversations. And yeah, it reminds me of just a different model of looking at purpose and community, right? We know, again, historically, when we were more nomadic before we had agriculture, things like the plow, to be able to farm at that level and stay static, we moved in communities. And so we co-raised children. We cared about children. It wasn't about the change with agriculture and into private property. It then became, I want to pass down my lineage of this property and this, all of this wealth that I have, which now means I only care about my child and my child's future and this, right? And so what I'm hearing from your experience is something that goes much back to more of our historical lineage of community care, right? Where people are coming together to care for this child, and also affords you the space to be able to be in the sport, which is very different than maybe, in a more like typical, society of our modern thought, where it's like, no, I got to go home and do my own work. You can't slackline. Yeah, whatever. That's your own problem. Go find daycare for yourself, right? Like a very individualistic. And so it's so beautiful that you have this space where people are coming together to care in ways that we've done for hundreds of thousands of years, right? Before this, right? Exactly. And so it's always so wild to me. I mean, I didn't know this before getting everything I did and doing my research, but now when I look at it, I'm like, it's so wild that we do this model and then beat ourselves up for struggling and beat ourselves up as if we are the problem. So I'll spend a lifetime with that.
In some ways, I'm desperately old-fashioned.
Exactly. Yeah.
Being a nomadic sling carrying mom whose home is where her community is kind of old school.
Absolutely. And yet people will throw rocks at you and be like, how dare you? What are you doing? You know, it's like, well, what are you doing? You know, it's okay.
It just suits me, and I would never want to dictate, you know, like I live in a bus. I don't have a fixed place that I live. We tend not to spend more than a couple of nights in any one place, just because we like to experience the world. And we live in a really beautiful county in the southwest of England. We can, you know, be near the woods, we can be near the coast, we can be near the moors in the national park. And I love that I can give my daughter that. I love that I can give my daughter that exposure, both to the natural world and all these different places, and to these different communities, different people in different parts of the UK. So I think a nomadic lifestyle makes you very intentional about your resources. And community is obviously a resource, a terribly important resource. Belonging is a resource that we need, like air. And it makes you notice where that's coming from and really care for and want to nourish where that's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be excited to talk to your daughter like many years later. She wants to come on the show. I'm like, please tell me how this impacted you. We'll get into it. I wish I was raised in a situation like that, right? Oh, so beautiful.
One day there's going to be some natural history documentary that's on being raised by highliners.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like any other kid. I mean, there's irreducible humanity to all of us. And I think we basically are all terribly similar, and we need really similar things. And when life gets dismantled, which it did very dramatically for me at a number of different points, it makes you look at what those components were in the first place and whether they're valuable enough to put back or not. And so I've arrived at a lifestyle that looks really different than most people's.
Sure.
But I've arrived at it from the basis of looking for really similar things, I think, than most people look for.
Yeah. I think about love, connection, purpose, meaning, some of those essential core things that we all need, really. Yeah.
And I run a business, and my kid goes to a standard school. You know, you can mix and match these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great segue, I think, into the next question, which is, how does relationship anarchy impact your practice of intimacy?
The first thing that kind of springs to mind there is that we're intimate with so many people all the time. That intimacy to me doesn't mean sexuality. It doesn't mean, or is not limited to sex and sexuality. And I think there is a pleasure to the smile you exchange with the supermarket checkout person, you know, that's valuable to both of you because it's human connection and you can maybe brighten someone's day. Intimacy is everywhere. And it's a mistake to think that it's not, because if you bring a mindfulness to the fact that it's everywhere and also an enjoyment to the fact that it's everywhere.
Right.
Human connection is this really splendid thing that we're all very much in need of from a physiological perspective, never mind that it's, you know, intellectually important.
Right.
I think one of the really strong themes for me in relationship anarchy is that dissolution of the idea that intimacy is just between you and your sexual partner. It's definitely affected that element as well in terms of my sexuality. And I think that the way that I relate to whether or not I have a sexual connection with somebody has become a much more open, fluid, and listening based practice. I mean, I identify as queer and also as a very sexual person, but as someone who is really not bothered by what I would term low quality connection. I really am not about quantity. I'm very much about quality.
Yes.
It means that I have some very strong connections with a very limited number of people rather than a kind of, I don't like this because it might sound belittling, but rather than like a Pokemon
Yeah, I've heard that metaphor. Yes.
of non-monogamy, where you're
Yes.
like collecting, and I think that's a big misunderstanding that people have when they hear that I identify as a relationship anarchist. In terms of my relationship philosophy, they automatically assume that I would have loads of partners or that I would be pursuing loads of sexual partners, and that's really not a piece of it for me. If someone shows up in my life and that's the emergent property of us meeting, then that's wonderful. But I also think handling that in a way where I don't damage or diminish my existing connections in pursuit of new connections, that's something that's also really important to me.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot in social media and media in general, particularly in the last 10 years, like increasingly so, about polyamory, about non-monogamy. And there's issues for me in creating this cultural perception that it's about having loads and loads of sexual partners, and also about this idea that that connection is kind of cheap and kind of individualistic and sort of comes from a place of, well, I'm entitled to have loads and loads of partners, as if the mutual benefit, as if the care aspect of anarchy was not, part of that conversation. Because for me, it very much is. So I think the way that I practice relationship anarchy in terms of intimacy, it's really about very much valuing the intimacies, however small and however fleeting and however casual. And then also when it comes to more in-depth, more involved relationships, again, really centering, cherishing what I have rather than the constant pursuit of something different. Because I think life will just bring it to me.
It does.
If I'm open, if I'm listening, life will bring me connection. So yeah, I've never been, I don't think I've ever been on a date. I've never been on something you could really formally call a date with somebody that I've not met before.
I hear
I've
you.
certainly never been on a dating app. And these things work for some people. And as I say, I would definitely say that I'm a highly sexual person, and that's a really important part of my life. But I also feel like for me, the quality comes from the depth and comes from the time invested in those relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I haven't been on a date in years either. What even is that? But yeah, I feel you. It's like, I don't even know.
It feels like organized fun.
Yeah, exactly.
I like fun to be spontaneous.
Yeah. We meet, and like you said, like meeting for the unfolding of where the intimacy naturally goes, right? Not meeting of like, hey, we're here to like fuck and be in a romantic relationship. It's like, hey, we're here to connect. If that's a part of it, great. If not, beautiful, right?
Yeah. Even with the fucking, the curiosity is still the most important thing. To lead with curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. And keep following where the desire goes, because even that will change what the emergent properties and chemistry between two people is and how they relate. I think honestly the sluttier I become with like reclaiming that word with power and embodiment, the sluttier I become, the slower I move into sexuality. Because I'm like, do we have the skills to be friends and able to communicate and work through whatever sort of complicated emotional things can come through with this situation? Because I definitely want to be friends and communicate regardless of whether we go into this space. I want to be fluidly able to go out of it and back in, right? And so those are a lot of skills that sometimes aren't always there. And so I'm finding myself like so open to sex and also so moving slowly with intentionality in every connection.
I think a word that I like is discernment.
Yeah.
I think a word that fits with relationship anarchy to me is discernment. and having the space and time to stand back and be thoughtful and be like, is this honestly where I want this to go? Because it might be fantastic, and being open to that is a huge part of this kind of ethos, but at the same time building on what there is without rushing, like you say, just taking your time, such that you get to keep what is already splendid.
Exactly.
I think.
Yes, exactly.
It relates to kink and my practice of kink and my exploration of kink also.
Yes.
Because that's like another layer to sexuality that, again, if it's explored with care and kindness and consent and consideration, is this incredible expansive landscape to explore with somebody who you might not be standardly sexual with. And I have in a number of different iterations of my relationships had partners come together over kink bonds. And so I think when you're thinking about that within the kink culture, intentionality is like, and consent, they're a lot higher profile. But for me, this a beautiful segue back into relationship anarchy as well, because for me that practice is definitely about slowing things down, checking in with people, making sure that you've granted the space to yourself to actually like settle into what is before you rush into something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kink in its highest form is really so much communication, right? About what you're wanting, where your limits are, what parts of yourself you're exploring, right? And so there's so much there that is built with a strong foundation of intentionality, right? Which allows you to go to much more expansive, edgy parts of your consciousness and embodiment, right? And so the more intentional you can be about that foundation, the more you can explore those edges, which is so beautiful. And so I think, just like in other sorts of sexual connections, same thing, and really any sort of connection, right? The more you build with an intentionality, communication, slowness, the more you can go into and have more of that foundation built. And you also spoke so much to the expansiveness of intimacy and seeing all of that. I often think about that as a frame, right? Like, where is your frame? It's something as simple as the glass, is it half full, half empty, right? But that's a profound metaphor we use because I think so much of our Western society, right? Again, not the whole world. That's an important piece of this. Our Western society is the one. Forget all of your platonic connections. Those aren't important. Look for the one, right? And so your frame, it's almost like your sunglasses or the frame is so small that you're like, if I don't have this one thing, I'm miserable, right? And that is a lot of the like culture around like, I'm single and I'm so miserable. I'm single, I'm so miserable, right?
Yeah.
And so when you expand the frame out to look at all of your relationships, oh my gosh, the picture is so beautiful. It's so wide. And so I feel like you start to see more of that joy, more of the possibilities. Like you're saying, even the smile with the clerk at the store, right? That is a moment of human connection. And so when your frame is so small to the one, you're not seeing all these other moments where you are connecting with humans, let alone like the animal and plant world, if we want to get there, right? But like really expanding that frame, and then therefore finding more joy and gratitude and presence in that is so beautiful.
I think there's a way, well, there's many ways in which the society we live in, capitalism, all kinds of things historically bring to bear an atmosphere of scarcity.
Yes.
And scarcity drives fear, it drives panic, it drives this pursuit of things in a much more fearful, grabby sort of way. Whereas if you feel like you're in abundance, if you feel like you have plenty of what you need, you act very differently. You show up in the world very differently. In my life, having had all of the systems, all of the structures that you grow up feeling like you're supposed to rely on, I had the full-time job and the mortgage and the husband and all of the things, the tick box, career progression, academic success. And then eventually I was still homeless and I still had my daughter to care for and all our basic needs to look after. And I built myself back up. But that process entailed like this huge pruning because I was starting from nothing. And that was real scarcity.
Yeah.
I had moments where I wasn't sure how I would keep the both of us warm. And so that sort of scarcity means that the scarcity that I thought I had before kind of just diminished
Sure.
massively.
Sure.
It wasn't so important anymore. And the smallest things I became really, really grateful for. And I think cornerstone things in my own recovery, building back up from a really desperate situation in terms of my physical well-being, but also
Right.
in terms of my mental well-being, because I ended up with a diagnosis of complex PTSD.
Mm.
I've been through this rebuilding whereby putting the smallest things in place became really important. And then also I had this enormous gratitude for them. And the intentionality inherent in that is massive.
Mm-hmm.
And it allowed me to get closer and closer into this allyship with relationship anarchy, because it was that same model repeated in my connections with other people. It was, what do I really need? What's really nourishing me? What do I really cherish? And
Mm-hmm.
in whose life am I also really bringing joy?
Mm-hmm.
Who is it that I'm able to really benefit? Who is it who I'm able to get really close to, and we still feel this enormous amount of safety
Yeah.
where we can build trust together. So
Mm-hmm.
I got more discerning about pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I have this minimalism, I guess. I don't have very many things. Everything I own is in this bus.
Sure.
I don't
Yeah.
have I don't have loads of partners in the sense of the partners that people think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people assume when they hear non-monogamy that you have like 6 partners, and it's up to everyone to decide what works for them. But I think for me, a small amount of the right things is like a philosophy that I take everywhere, because then you do have that sense of abundance because you have exactly what you need.
Mm-hmm.
It's a piece of the practice of mindfulness for me to like
Mm-hmm.
really pay attention to what those things are.
Yeah.
And so I love and really kind of celebrate the way that adopting a philosophy of relationship anarchy makes you take those things apart, makes you ask the questions, makes you get into really deep, really granular conversations with people, and kind of scrutinize what it is that's working for you and what it is that isn't. Because what
Yeah.
comes out of that is so joyful.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like you're hitting on the next question, which is why practice relationship anarchy. I'm hearing the ways that it's brought quality over quantity in so many different ways, right? And your connections. And I think that that's a really important piece, right? Because often there is this push more and more and more. I mean, look at our society, right? So of course that's impacting our relationships, right? And so I hear you coming back to this like quality, where's the depth of the connection here, and really focusing on that rather than chasing, rather than doing the hedonic treadmill of novelty and new connections, right? How can I go deeper into these spaces, into these people that are around me right now? And so I see that in so many different ways, probably with the lifestyle, the community that you've built, the relationships with your children, right? And when I first came into relationship anarchy and hearing about non-hierarchy, my brain was thinking, great, we learn. We're just going deeper down the rabbit hole. But at the very beginning, I was like, cool, I'll have like 2 partners, 3 partners, I don't know, 4. And so then I was like, wow, like if I have 4 people, then it's 25, 25, 25, 25, because non-hierarchy, right? And then I was like really trying to figure out what that meant of like sharing. And then what I lacked at that time of the consciousness was understanding that I have way more than just partners. It's not actually about just partners. It's about all of your connections. And so when you look into all of your connections, you're like, okay, well, non-hierarchy is definitely not going to mean splitting it up into pure percentages, because how many friends do I have or connections? Like 25, 50?
Yeah.
Okay, so I see you for 1 minute, like what the hell does that look like? Let alone the full planet of how many people are here, right? And so I think about it like in rings, like orbits, right? We have some people that orbit us much wider. There's planets, moons, stars that come much closer, right? And I appreciated when I talked to Juan Carlos, like the discussion of it not being hierarchy in terms of time and energy, energy, because those are finite resources, but rather hierarchy of power over moments, right? So like one of my connections does not have power over the connections I have with other people, right? I do believe that time and energy are power under our society. So that's an important, like, right, fine, we can get nerdy about it. Finite resource, there is power in that. You know, we don't gotta go too far down the rabbit hole, but like just trying to understand that it's inevitable that all of us will also have a stratification of connections because time and energy is not that abundant resource. Love is, right? But within that, to not have power over models, right? And so we're building that expansive community of care and people. And so I don't think I had that lens to understand that it's not just about partnerships, right? It's about the whole community and how can you tend to a loving, caring, mutual space. Just that word non-hierarchical was so hard to like fathom at the beginning, I think.
It's always interested me that we don't bring that concept to bear in our other kind of Western culture approved connections. So when we think about if you have multiple children, or you have, obviously most people have two parents, and if you have both of them alive, how do you apportion your time between them and then your grandparents and then your uncles and aunts? And we don't tend to get into a panic about, oh, if I have a second child, then I'll have to split what proportion of this does this child get, and then this we don't even think about it like that. We come at it from the perspective of love being abundant, and we come at it from the perspective of, okay, life is lived on the fly. It's a spontaneous thing. We don't really have any control over what happens. What we're doing is responding all the time to what people need, according to what capacity we have. I mean, those two words, the need and the capacity piece, come straight from anarchist literature historically. And yet that's how we practice family life, how we practice having children and rearing children. We don't go into a kind of spiraling panic about how we're going to manage multiple connections. And so it doesn't seem difficult to me to just take that into romantic or sexual relationships, because it's already part of my concept, and in fact part of most people's concept, that love is abundant and that time will be apportioned responsively according to the needs of the people and also the personal preferences of the individual. And in the two people who obviously are very close to me, who would call themselves my partners, and I refer to them as partners because it's the useful kind of social metric and helps me explain myself in daily life to people. One of them I spend much more time with on a daily basis, and we refer to each other as companion animals. I'm his companion animal and he is my companion animal.
Yeah.
And it doesn't say anything about the depth of our relationship in a comparison with my other partner, who I see less. She has a family, she has two sons of her own and a practice that she looks after. So she has less time to spend with me on a daily basis, but it's never really come into any kind of conflict, because it's simply an expression of the preferences that we have, the alignment that our lives have, and listening to that again, listening to how much time do you have? Okay, well, I have this time here and you have this time here, and this is a thing I'd love if we could do together, but that thing, actually, I don't really want to do that with you. I'd rather do that with this person. We have those conversations within our friendship groups. We have those conversations within our families, and understanding that there will always be difficulties, jealousies, insecurities, things that come up that are really challenging. And those come up in our friendship groups. They come up in our families as well. But that those aren't things to run away from. Those aren't things to suddenly get the need to get into scarcity and get into apportioning percentages of time and kind of freaking out about that, because it's okay. We do have the capacity, if we're willing to work on our communication skills, to just let this stuff kind of settle out on its own. It's not something that's that wildly different, I think, in relationship anarchy, because we can bring skills that we already are having in other areas of our lives. So yeah, I have this one partner who I see, if I'm lucky, once a week, because we're often very busy and we're often in different parts of the country. We've also had a relationship that spans 17 years, and another partner who I've had a relationship with for 4 years, who, and these have changed, obviously, these relationships, but they're with me an awful lot more of the time, even though they technically live at the other end of the country. So there's all these strange ways in which it kind of just comes together. but it's from listening and from communicating.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I like to say the unconscious of how deep it goes within our unconscious, right? Because often we are fish in the water and we don't
Mm,
even see the water, right? Of our cultural conditioning and the narratives and the scripts about what it means to be in relationship with other people. Again, historically, we know many of the roots of our relational practices in the West are a modern thing that has not been
mm,
practiced all around the world. So we know that. That's a fact, right? Then we're in the space where people get to choose what they want to do with that. But historically, we've existed in much more fluid ways. And even if we want to get into the evolutionary thoughts about bonobos and how they, relate for social connectedness with sexuality in much more fluid, even queer
mm,
way, right? So if we want to go down that evolutionary path, we can get into all of that. We are social beings that love to make stories. Our big,
mhm.
beautiful brains make
Oh yeah.
stories, which is beautiful. That's how we connect, right? As a culture, all our oral stories.
How we make meaning of our experience. It's a fantastic
Hmm.
thing.
Exactly, exactly. And so when you live in a society that has a story of how to relate in a quote unquote healthy way, right? It's
Mm,
really hard to unpack that and
mm,
unpack how deep that goes. I remember sitting in my clinical psychology doctoral training and a professor telling me that non-monogamy never works ever, right? So here I
mm.
have this woman with power, a doctorate, telling me, a little baby student in class, absolutely not, this never works. And so that's a moment of someone with power with her
Yeah.
credentials in our system and her quote unquote expertise to say this never works. I've had other conversations with professors who say, well, like it's just like with attachment, we've got the two parent model and that's really the best model, It's
Mm.
just funny when they say that because I'm like, "Oh, you're telling me we attach to two different people? Great.
Well,
Let's all at least have two partners then. That seems to be if we want to go down that path, like then at least two partner, but I don't even begin at that path because the reality is even in that model, you still have multiple other people you're attached to in that circle,
yeah,
whether it's
yeah,
aunts, friends, or we outsource it with literal money to pay for a preschool or to pay for these other, like there are more than one person. And so it's just wild to me how but I think part of that is just the cultural scripts that we live in. It is so deep. And so it takes a long time historically for people to unlearn to a point where we could at least get to a space of freedom, where you could not feel
mm,
judgment for choosing paths of multiplicity, right? Of liberation with your eroticism, right? There's still so much internalized judgment, stigma. It's not
mm,
safe at
yeah,
work for some folks, all those other pieces. And
yeah.
so we're just not yet in that space where we have that sort of liberation. But I hear it and I feel you so much of like, look at all these other models where we do this with kids and we say that we can have multiple connections. And of course there's a limit to that. You start having 8, 12,
Mm,
you start realizing, wow, and so same things with our relationships and with friendships too. Look at this beautiful stratification of how many different connections we have. Some people you see once a year, some people you
mm,
see once a week, some people you see much more often than that. And sure, throwing in something like an intimacy of sexuality, like that could be something that's absolutely fluid within those connections too, right? If you want to
yeah,
be. It's not the
yeah,
pinnacle, but within our society, that is often the most tricky and complicated piece of all of
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And so it's just we have the models there, but the narratives and the assumptions and the nervous system stuff with all of that is deep,
Yes, yes.
deep.
I think it's really it's interesting to look at it from that model because obviously this is relating to the research background that I come from. If you look at the prairie vole
Yeah.
research on monogamous pair bonds even, and the way that we're using it's understood that we're using an attachment model from like the neurobiology of that model comes from our attachments to our caregivers, and then we repurpose that into adulthood when we're making connections for romantic sexual partnerships, and that's established to be the case. But at no point when you look at the actuality of it is that limited to one or even two or even three people, as you say, because we can attach to multiple caregivers, we can attach to a new caregiver at a different point later on, and the whole point is that our neurobiology is plastic. One of the wonderful things about human beings is that we have this plasticity. We're incredibly flexible, we're incredibly adaptable. You can put us in most habitats in the world and we seem to do very well. And it's the same with relational connections in terms of a habitat. Also, we can fit into all kinds of different habitats. And I think it's just a case of looking at which one suits you and actually exercising a choice intentionally, instead of just adopting the prevailing script that you're handed. Because as you said, we're meaning making animals, and we do this through story. But if you don't question the stories that you're given, you never get to make that choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in so many ways, adopting a non-standard lifestyle, whatever that is for yourself, including and not limited to relationship anarchy in my case, is a practice in analyzing what works for you and then trusting yourself. And I think this is something that it's something that I've come to that's really been nurtured by the sport that I do, because
Sure.
when you're on a slack line at height in the middle of the sky with 1 inch of webbing underneath you and nothing but the thoughts rattling around in your own head for company, it doesn't matter what anyone said to you on the ground. It doesn't matter what intention you brought up there. It doesn't matter what anyone else is thinking or expecting of you, because there's this aloneness to that situation,
Sure.
to the degree of exposure to your own capacity that you have in that situation. So you have to learn to listen to yourself and let that be good enough, because there literally isn't anything else. And there's an allegory in that for me in terms of looking at my experience and the challenges and struggles that I've had in life, that in so many ways have reduced things to the bare bones and forced me to rebuild my homelessness, my queerness, my non-monogamous tendencies, my challenges with disability. All these things, they take from you what you expected, and then you are forced into a position of, well, what can I do now? What do I actually want? And can I trust myself to go get that, to find that, to build that, to pull it out of the bag somewhere, to find the resilience from somewhere?
Yeah.
And in all these ways, I'm falling back on myself. It's a very vulnerable thing to do, to trust yourself. I think so many of us struggle with self-worth because we're in so many ways letting ourselves down, and we know we're not trustworthy. Something that I've had to do in my life, and I bring this into my practice of relationships as well, is to take apart with some serious scrutiny what my values are and how I am or am not actually practicing them, and then kind of hold myself to account for that.
Sure.
And try to make sure that the life that I'm living truly is a reflection of the life I want to live, and not one where I'm just telling stories about how it would be nice to be this way or that way.
Sure.
But and in so doing, in living in my integrity and living in my wholeness, as far as I keep finding what that looks like, I then trust myself more, because I'm credible and because I'm competent. And I think highlining's really helped me to develop that. And then having the community that I've had around me also has allowed me the resilience to kind of do what we all do when put on a slackline, which is to fall down a lot and try and stand back up again. And in relationships, we fuck things up. In relationships, we didn't realize that was a blind spot, and we do something insensitive. And how you hold yourself to account, how you repair, how you show up the next time with a different intention, now that you know, those things are so critical to being able to hold multiple intimacies, multiple connections all at the same time. So I think it fits with so many themes in my life of that kind of like self-reflection and a work towards integrity and wholeness and self-trust. That's these themes all link together all the time.
Absolutely, yes. It's a practice, and so that practice can be mirrored in so many different areas of your life. And so I can imagine with slacklining, and I say imagine because I've gone a slackline a couple of times, and man, that is so hard. I've only had someone walk me with their hands, right, relationally, so that I could balance on the slackline. Like, mad respect for that.
We'll have to got there.
Exactly. Yeah, we all have to start somewhere. Exactly. Because I look at slackliners, I see them like do like flips and stuff on lines, and I'm like,
Oh,
what? How? But I'm a rock climber, so that's like my area of practice of like
yeah, yeah.
extreme sports, and I'm sure there's a lot of ways where it crosses
Mm,
in the like you're saying, the heights when you're there, and the monkey mind and all of the fear and the thoughts that are going on both in the mind and the body.
mm,
Same for rock climbing when you're up there and then you're trying to make that next lead clip, you're like shaking.
yeah,
But I think a lot about how when we were talking about the historical roots, the different perspectives on how we've done relationships in the past, the research, right? When even having all of that, that's such a cognitive piece, right? You can
yeah,
be on that slack line and know, hey, I've got this gear. I'm on this rock climbing route. The rope is right there. But oh my
yeah,
gosh, my body is still making all of these fears and moments of
yeah,
connections. And so when I think about my relationships, like knowing like, okay, I believe this, I believe the philosophy, I believe all of this that I know about relationships. I've read Sex at Dawn, I've read The Ethical Slut, I've read blah, 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 whatever amount of books.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
still my body is reacting, like my partner's, oh, I'm
Mm,
going on another date. Oh, I'm doing this. Oh, I'm making this new connection. Fear, fear, fear,
yeah,
fear, fear, right? And it's like so frustrating at the beginning. And not to say I'm done with that, but to acknowledge I've gotten much stronger in those muscles, but
yeah.
than before, but still more to go. But always at the beginning, it was so, so scary. And so when I think about that, I try to talk about the unconscious. And again, for years of our lives, we have this level of social conditioning where like the media will say, it's like some dumb quote, right? Like, if you find someone else that you fall in love with, leave the first person because you never would have fallen in love if you really loved the first person, right? Or that someone's gonna leave, right? These are deep within our unconscious. So when there's that small moment of someone saying, oh, I'm gonna go explore this new connection or new this, your body within microseconds is responding to that classical conditioning that is so deep within the body. And
Yeah.
so it was frustrating for me because I'm like, intellectually, I'm right here, but my body is right here, right? And so having compassion for yourself as you're unlearning these scripts and these narratives, right? And so I'm
Mm,
sure like slacklining and like rock climbing, what makes that easier is exposure. You take the
yeah.
fall, you're okay. Your partner goes on a date, they come back. It's okay, right? And you
Mhm.
also have other people that do it, right? I see other people rock climbing. I'm like, damn, they're doing it. They're good. Okay. I'm sure you see other people slackline. You're like, okay, okay. Right. And so,
Like
like,
I
the
did
beauty.
a backflip on a slack line and still
Exactly.
alive.
Yes, exactly. And so it sets an
Yeah,
example of what is possible,
yeah,
and you can co-regulate with those people after you take a fall, right? And you're like, God, that was really scary. They're like, oh yeah, I've been on falls like that too, right? And you can kind of co-regulate. And so when people, I think, are wanting to step into expansive relating around relationship anarchy and thoughts like this, I always say there's loads of work that you can do on the individual and your psyche, but you also absolutely need a community for moments like
mm,
this to see what is possible, to co-regulate together, and all of that being, I would say, almost confidently more important is finding the
yeah,
community rather than just trying to do this individual self stuff. There's a lot to
yeah,
do there. Don't get me wrong. I'm here for that. Like journaling. Wow, what a powerful practice. However, the community, the community.
yeah. Having models for how it
Yep.
works, having other people's experiences to hear from, I think is one of I'm just going to big you up here and say the podcast is fantastic
Oh,
and it's really great because it feels like proper conversations with people who are willing to be that vulnerable. And so
yeah.
it's again expanding that sense of community that we have because you can tune in and hear other people voicing similar concerns or laughing about the same things or saying, "Oh yeah,
Right.
I messed that up too once," and here's how I set that right. I
Yeah.
think something that's hugely important, just like the exposure on the high line when you're stuck in your own head, that's how it feels when your nervous system is triggered by
Right.
something relational. And maybe that's a friendship, maybe it's a sexual relationship, maybe it's a romantic partnership, maybe
Right.
it comes under the umbrella of all of those, but something's pinged your amygdala, something's making your attachment system feel like it's about to hit scarcity hard, and you're terrified. And it doesn't really matter how long you've been doing this relational style,
Yeah.
the sensation, the physical sensation, and the fact that your body will go through that kind of
Hmm.
just sits there the same no matter what. And what changes is your resilience to dealing with it. What changes is your ability to approach it with curiosity and vulnerability and use it as a point of connection with your partner rather than a point of disconnection. So rather than running away from them in fear or shoving them back because you think it's them that caused it, you get closer and you get more curious and you say, hey, can I say something daft? Because I really need you to hear this. And they go, of course it's not like this, and you let them have a chance to tell you how much they love you or how much you mean to them. But I think it's a thing that I've come up against over and over again is never, ever underestimating the importance of those moments where you want to say to your partner, can I ask a silly question? Even if you're experienced, and you think, oh, I should be okay at this now. I should be fine. I shouldn't be insecure about that. I've done this a whole bunch of times. If you can say, it dissipates the physicality, it dissipates the clenchedness, the swirling stomach, the gripped shoulders, all of the things that we can't separate ourselves from in our biology. And it lets you soften into the other person again. And I think it's so true what you're saying about identifying that these things are nervous system phenomena and that they're physically based in our bodies. And I think that the more I have looked into practices of embodiment through meditation and through yoga and through slacklining and through all sorts of things as part of my trauma recovery, the more I realized that we're physical beings and being in contact with other physical beings and relating on that plane of the physical experience is so important. And so that's a key way that I feel like it's really important to practice compassion in our relationships, is over those little details, over those little moments of, I've fallen off the emotional slackline again. This time I really hit the ground hard, and I could do the hug and to tell you about it, and always being there as far as your capacity extends for other people to come to you and say, this thing hurts and I'm not even sure why, or it's just such an important part of maintaining connection is to allow all the space for the fails and the falls and the bumps and the tiny grazes even to be met with kindness and to be held as just as valuable as the big cognitive ideals and
totally
the things that we might read about in the books and really nod strenuously about.
Because
the experience of this relational philosophy, the lived experience is a physical one.
Oh yeah, philosophy and the actual practice are two different things, as I've well learned and continue to learn, absolutely. And so I'm hearing that healthy interdependence, right? Being able to do your own self-work and open up to other people supporting you in that. And I even just yesterday when I was at the climbing gym, someone was telling me about how they're starting to lead climb, and they're like, it's so scary. I feel it in my body. It's so scary. And so some days I say I never want to do it again, and other days I'm like, I should be pushing through that. And I was like, what if it was like a daily invitation, like, how do I feel today? How do I feel today, right? And being able to be fluid rather than this binary of I have to push, take the high dose psychedelic or whatever it is that you're trying to stretch your nervous system to, or just walk away completely. I feel like I found a lot of healing and compassion in the negotiation. Some days I do need a little bit more holding and nurturance and reassurance. Other days I feel really great and I'm like, go, feeling that abundance. And so understanding that also, like, through that practice, our nervous system is going to shift depending on the weather of our lives, metaphorically and probably physically, because winter is difficult for a lot of people depending on where you're at, right? And so all those sort of contextual factors. And so I'm curious for you, like, the next question is leading into the difficulties and the joys of relationship anarchy and trying to balance that. I'm curious if you could speak to that in your lived experience.
I've had a great deal of difficulty in bringing this practice into my life because it doesn't always meet people's expectations and it doesn't align with the cultural norms. And then also my own personal practice of it can and has been misunderstood by people that I'm relating to. But I would say that over the course of time, I've grown in the confidence that I have to work through those things with people and to be able to stick with something and explain my perspective rather than getting scared off. I think I had a lot of hang-ups about being a non-monogamous person, whether I was too much effort,
Sure.
too much hassle to relate to, because in the situations where there's been multiple sexual relationships going on in my life, sometimes there's been catastrophes in that, really
I hear
difficult.
you.
And I think a lot of people who have a relationship philosophy, such as relationship anarchy, they have experienced things like that too. But what I would say was that, like everything, it's been this enormous journey of self-awareness. Like my career, my relationship to myself, my parenting, all these things are in development. They're all a journey all the time. And I think when something just keeps coming back to you, it's worth continuing the curiosity. It's worth continuing the effort, because I think I can say with confidence now that this, not necessarily an essential component of non-monogamy, but a philosophy aligned with relationship anarchy, just sits easily with me. It just feels like a natural extension of who I am. And it's come out of that realm of the cognitive and the books that I've read and the things that I would like to aspire to. It feels like a practice of love in a really full sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like the business of my life is to practice love. It's what I do
Yeah.
gardening as a career choice, because
Yeah.
that's about nurturing, it's about growth, and it's about applying love in a really physical sense such that things can flourish. And that's definitely something that comes into the way that I show up in relationships. But the work necessary in gardening, it's also necessary in your relationship style, in whatever that is. I think everyone finds that relationships are work.
Yeah.
This in particular, to adopt a philosophy of relationship anarchy, it means knowing that it comes with a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I just think it's very worthwhile to stick with it if it calls you, because to speak to the joys rather than the difficulties and the challenges, I feel so much abundance and so much gratitude in my life for the connections that I have, be it sexual, be it romantic, be it friendship, whatever other categories people might choose to put on them. I'm buoyed up by, I'm raised up by the people in my life. And I'm a social animal. This is irreducibly important to the nature of who I am. And I think that expression, now that I've arrived at a place that I'm comfortable saying this is me to express, it's allowed a gentleness to come into my life.
Yeah.
That I think comes from that abundance.
Yeah.
So it's hugely rewarding, despite the challenges and the pitfalls and the nightmares and the
Absolutely.
and always refining and using that discernment, like I say. But yeah, it's very, very, very concretely a practice.
Yes.
It will not always get right, but
No.
it feels wonderful when you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know for myself, I've felt that calling to it from originally hearing the words, and that was the beginning of the podcast, even using the words modern anarchy, of like connecting to that idea as many years ago and starting there. And I know for myself, when I have been put into a space of past my zone of tolerance into dysregulation, there's obviously like a lot of somatic pieces I can feel: the tightness in the chest, the turning in the stomach, I'm caving forward, I'm crying, I'm not breathing fully, whatever, all of that. And also cognitively, I know that I've been pushed to a point when I start to say, I can't do this. Why do I even do this? You know, I've taken whatever fall from a relationship or two, because that can happen where you have conflict in multiple at the same time, and you go, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I here? Why am I doing this?
Whose idea was this?
Yeah, exactly. Why? And then, you know, so that's when I know I've pushed too far, because I'm like, oh, okay. And I think we see that in other areas of your life, right? Like, why do I rock climb at all? Why do I ever do this? Why do I slackline? Why do I garden? There's all these things in the garden, right? Whatever it is, we get those points, and then our brain goes into that state of like negative, all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking, right? And it's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but I guess this far into the journey of relationship anarchy, it's so many connections around me where it's so grounded, where like, sometimes I'm like, why am I even doing this? I'm like, well, I'm actually so far down the rabbit hole. I don't know if I can really remove my, like it holds me now because I'm like, well, this is my whole community now. I mean, like I am here. So it's a little bit easy in some of that. But at the beginning, it was very hard because I'd be like, oh, maybe I should just abandon or get out of this. Take it slow. You don't have to slackline every day when maybe you have an injury. You don't have to crock climb every day when you have an injury, right? We can take it slow and ease into that. And like you're saying, there's so much joy when you do learn those skills and you have those muscles of communication and working through conflict and rupture and repair, which are inevitable parts of any sort of relationship. And so to work through those skills, there are days where it is tiring and you need to rest, right? But also like what a muscle to have built, and then to see the fruits of that labor when you have so many beautiful connections and those small moments where you see your community all come together. It's like at least those are some of my favorite moments, where you see all these people that you have these deep relationships with intermingling and connecting and sharing moments of intimacy together. And I'm just like, like what a beautiful moment, and the richness of that, truly.
There were very hectic moments where both partners and all three of the children involved within two of the adults in the three adults were all in the same household. And it's bonkers, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
But absolutely fantastic. And it feels so lovely to sit at a dinner table with the people that you care for so much, and have that ease settle into a setting like that. Or when I see one of the people who's really meaningful to my daughter, helping her, and particularly with the challenge of disability, helping her in a moment when I don't feel resourced to. What that means to me is just, I don't have the words to describe its value. I really don't. There are times when I've done too much, either highlining or work or a combination of everything, or some really stressful life event has happened. And then the way that people muck in to help me and my daughter, and the closeness and the vulnerability that's possible within this model, I cherish that beyond words. It's really something that's brought so much benefit to me and my daughter's life. And I hope so deeply that benefit is mutual. And it seems to be, because we all keep coming back to the table for more. So it has bumps in the road and it has hard bits. But I think if there's one thing I've really been learning over the past 3 or 4 years of coming to terms with the challenge of disability, especially in relation to trying to continue doing an extreme sport with that, it's that listening to what resources I do have and trying not to exceed that threshold, trying all the time to walk that balance, like you're saying, between, oh, well, I'll just back off and not do this at all, or I'll go full throttle. And I'm coming from a background of more than full throttle. I throw myself at life like nobody's business. And part of me will always do that. I don't think I would be slacklining at heights and flinging myself around trying to pursue freestyle at this point in my life if I wasn't that kind of person. But I can't do it in the way that a lot of people in my community can. I used to want to have 4 sessions a day. Now if I have one, that's a really good day, because I'm not going to have the resources to do it. And if I push and push and push and push, I will find myself injured. I will find myself in bed for a fortnight. I will find myself unable to look after my daughter. I will find all these big impacts. I won't be able to do my job, because gardening is a really physical career. And so I can't practice the things that I want to well if I don't listen to the resources that I have. And I think having a journey through fibromyalgia and complex PTSD has really brought me up hard against having to listen to those things, and coming back to self-care and self-nurturance and self-compassion first, so that I can bring those things into my wider world, so that I can deliver those things to other people and be a model of those things for my daughter. And I think it's something that's helped me in my practice of relationship anarchy, because, for example, me and my companion animal partner, we notice all the time that the times that insecurities come up, the times that things feel difficult relationally, maybe in response to a situation, but also just maybe, like you say, that whole, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this question? these difficulties, these challenges, more of the insecurities, they come up when you're tired.
Yeah.
They come up when you haven't slept well for 3 days. They come up when other life events are exhausting you.
Yep.
They come up when you've overextended yourself and taken on too many commitments.
Yep.
For us, it'll be around sleep. It'll be around, in his case, university commitments, or in my case, parenting commitments, or we're on a trip in Europe and we've been highlining for days and now we're absolutely knackered. It's always those times, it seems. So paying attention to what I actually have capacity for is something that's really helpful in that practice. And again, comes back to like the quality rather than quantity thing. I'm very aware, I'm kept aware on a daily basis of my limited capacity by my physical body. But I'm a person who wants a lot. I quote Naraya Waid all the time about living the life that drips down your chin. And so I have this desire to kind of throw myself in, this desire to go in at the deep end, to be really exposed, to be really vulnerable, to really push something. And at the same time, I'm learning all the time these lessons about going a little gentler. Going a little gentler for sure. And then how much more resourced I am to offer that gentleness to other people. To bring that gentleness into the relationships that I have. And having the capacity to hold others in that. And
So beautifully said. So beautifully said. And such a lifelong journey too, right? Of embodiment, right? Like I hope to get to the end of my life still going deeper and deeper into the practice of feeling into my body, feeling the pleasure, the pain, the suffering, the sorrow, all of it. And then also learning the skills to be in community with that, right? That lifelong practice of that. And you said it so well, and you've really covered so much of the different terrain of relationship anarchy. And so with all of that, I'm curious with the last question, what do you wish other people knew about relationship anarchy?
I love this question. I love this when you ask other people on their podcast. I think one thing that really I keep coming back to all the time in the conversations that I have with other people about this subject as well, is I wish people knew that relationship anarchy was not so outrageous, was not so anarchistic in the common parlance understanding. It's tea and toast, that it's having your laundry confused and trying to ball socks with someone, that it's someone who happens to know where your child's toothbrush is when you're too exhausted to look for it yourself. It's really ordinary humaning. And it's about a practice of humaning with as many people as it feels comfortable to bring close to you as possible, rather than bringing in a limited set of ideals and categories about what that looks like. Going back to that thing I said about being a little bit put off myself, not by the words meaning to me, but by the words meaning to others. I wish people had a greater understanding that anarchy is about thoughtfulness, measuredness, discernment, care, mutual benefit, generosity, and crumpets with an awful lot of jam. There is this side of the pleasure that is possible when you bring a lot of vulnerability to life that isn't about excess, that isn't about explosions, that's thoroughly sustainable and that's thoroughly warm and nurturing, and I think probably a lot more approachable than people imagine when they hear the term relationship anarchy. So yeah, I wish that was spoken to more.
Well, you did such a good job of speaking to it today with me. I'm so grateful. Truly, each one of these conversations is so life-giving, and I learn so much each time. And so it's such a joy to have this space, and I'm glad that the other episodes that I've made have resonated with you. It's truly... If I could have found this resource many years ago, I don't even know how cool I would have been. Just be like, wow, this is really like, so it's such a joy to make it. And it takes people like you who trust me, trust the space to come on to here and have this sort of conversation for our community and for the movement. And so I'm so grateful that you did that with me today and spoke to the wisdom of your lived experience with this practice, both the philosophical and the embodied aspect of that. And so as we come towards the end of our time, I'll take a deep breath with you. And then I'll check in and see if there's anything else you want to say. Otherwise, I have the closing question for you.
No, I don't think so. It's just
Okay.
been really wonderful to have another discussion with someone interested in this. There
Yeah.
are not so many people that I can have a really wonderful, open, vulnerable conversation and have so much common understanding on which to base it. So thank you.
Absolutely. That's the life force giving right there, right, Shirley, right? Like to feel seen.
Mm,
As you said, we're all craving to be seen, loved, and appreciated. And so it's such a joy when you have someone who understands that and the life-givingness that that can feel to be really seen. And that is so powerful. So such a
mm,
joy to hold that space for us and for all of the listeners who are tuning into our conversation too.
thank you.
Yeah. All right. So the last question that I ask everyone on the show is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
It's such a hard question.
I know.
I think yourself,
Mm,
that normal is an indefinable quality,
absolutely.
really. Whatever you are is good enough. It's fine. That's normal. It's your normal. And that we all get to
Mhm,
define our own normal.
mhm,
I think trusting that and listening to that and understanding that whatever you are isn't going to be exactly the same as anybody else or any social scripts you're handed.
mhm.
Being able to just, yeah, make space for your own authenticity. I
Yeah.
feel like if that could be a little bit more normal, a lot of us would be an awful lot more comfortable. We'd feel an awful lot more abundance, and we'd be able to treat each other with an awful lot more kindness and compassion. I think when
Mhm.
I see people in spaces where vulnerability is okay and they can just show up as whatever they are, be it freaky and weird or be it terribly vanilla, whatever it
Mhm.
is. If it's just really
Yeah.
you and it's allowed,
Yeah.
then then the best things come out of people. Absolutely the best things come out of people. So yeah, I wish that people thought that what was more normal was them as they
Mm-hmm.
are, unadulterated.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And as you spoke to the power of finding community spaces where that is reflected, right? They say we are, the amalgamation of the five closest people to you, right? So thinking about something like that, like if you're wanting to feel more comfortable in your authenticity to be able to find community spaces, right? And so the listener who's tuning in right now and hearing us say that, this is a form of community, right? Like we're two people, you're listening to the conversation, we're in this space together, right? And so that's a step towards that. And so then finding that in embodied dynamic relationships and people around you, that's how you start to have that transformation. Again, there is so much internal work that we can do. Journaling, learning new somatic tools, how to regulate your body, all of because that is a internal thing. Granted,
Mm,
mirror neurons we can co-regulate all day long, but there is that internal narrative to work through. But I just so strongly want to emphasize the importance of finding community and that being the most transformative thing. We see that when we look at relational patterns from the beginning with our families and caregivers, and then any sort of other relationships, it forms how we move through society. And so when we want to normalize feeling authentic, find the
mm,
spaces where you can do that and it is celebrated and
mm.
challenged, right? We need to be
Yeah,
challenged at
yeah.
time, call in, right? But to be able to be in those spaces will transform your nervous system every single day. Where you take that small moment, you're like, someone asks, how am I doing? You're like, I'm actually going to share that I had a really challenging week. This is my big
Yeah.
step. Here we go. And that person says, oh, wow, like what happened? I'd love to hear more. Whoa, okay, right? And so you start to learn it's safe to be able to do that rather than getting shut down because we need connection. And so when you find those spaces where you get even more connection by being your authentic self, your
Mm,
nervous system, your soul, your heart starts to bloom in those spaces. And
mm.
so, oh, yeah, the
That's it.
community work.
You
Yeah.
break down all the ways you were shackling yourself because you felt ashamed. You break down all the ways that you were holding yourself back or that you were holding yourself away from others and keeping yourself in disconnection and keeping them from being able to see who you are. And so I think that showing up with a kind of a radical insistence on being yourself and a radical devotion to truth telling those are some of the hardest things that we can do.
Yep.
They really are. But especially in the closest, most intimate relationships we have, if we can't bring a real version of ourselves, then the other person will always be relating to a made up story, because we're giving them really poor data. And if we want them closer to us, and if we want what we all want, which is to be seen and understood and to truly belong so that we feel really loved, we have to show up as the whole of what we are. And that's messy. Yeah. And it requires a holding of paradox and an appreciation of nuance and a care, a tenderness for all the weird stuff that crawls around in the corners, you know? And I think those things, I find that an awful lot in my community. And then even more for me, it's magnified by the experience of watching my daughter be in receipt of those things too. Yeah. And the way that by nurturing those things in myself, I become able to model them for her. Because for me in my life, it is not just me. There's this other nervous system that I'm responsible for, and I'm watching it be shaped by experiences the whole time. And the exposure that she has to non-normativity, to queerness, to neurodivergence, to non-monogamy and relationship anarchy, to people who do really strange things on sky noodles in odd costumes, you know? Sure, yeah. Who will also show you how they learned this instrument, or talk to you about this language that they know, or say, oh yeah, I really like stamp collecting, or whatever it is, you know? Yeah. There are so many little tiny ways in which the strangeness of everybody allows my daughter to be herself. Beautiful. That I can't sum up the gratitude that I have for all the people who show up in my life as they are, and the bravery that takes.
Absolutely. The ability to be your authentic self in those spaces. And yeah, when it is scary to open it up, when it is scary to share that, we can have the compassion for ourselves and knowing that somewhere along the line it was not safe to do so, whether that was family, friends, partners, any sort of connection, or even the general society, right? That says this is how you're supposed to be heterosexual and straight. And so like it might not even be in a lived relationship, but rather a culturally context sort of expectation where these parts of yourself are not safe to show up in relation. And so to keep ourselves safe, we hold it back. And so for anyone who is, myself included, often feeling nervous to connect with new people, right? It's a reminder that there have been times in the past where that has been painful or hurt, or there have been situations where you've needed to close up to protect yourself, right? And so you have compassion. I feel like starting with that beginning of compassion for knowing that we're always trying to keep ourselves safe. And that is why we've gotten to this space, and then finding new communities where you can do that sort of safe learning of opening up is okay, right? And so again, we are always healing in relationships. So much of the internal work is like, what relationships caused me to be this way? But also it's best to do that in community, talking about it, whether it's a healer, a therapist, a friend, right? Processing that, and then also doing the nervous system attunement work as you open up and feel safe again. I mean, it's like, it's all right here for me about healing and community and what it means to be able to thrive in that and to care in that. And you did such a powerful job today of opening up that conversation and being authentic and vulnerable about both the struggles and the joys of relationship anarchy. And it truly was such a joy to have you on the podcast today. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast, and head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.